the journey of enlightenment. I am your host, Dr. Gopaul. We have been studying various aspects of the Ramayana and its application to a practical world. Over the last few weeks, I have had many questions dealing with various issues of the Ramayana and Vedanta generally. Last session, we looked at 4 questions basically relating to Hinduism or Sanatana Dharma. Today, I would like to continue answering some of those questions before we proceed in our exposition of the Ramayana. These questions are very fundamental. It forms the basis for understanding the life of Shri Ram. The first question that I will attempt to answer today is, how is Shri Ram a warrior but yet considered to be the ideal yogi? Settled in his mind, focused, a person of equipoise. Is that not contradictory to his actions as a prince and a warrior? And the answer is no. It is not contradictory. It is actually the perfect example of what in Vedanta, in the study of Upanishads, that is, what we know as the actionless action. Now, the term actionless action might of itself seem to be contradictory. So let us go a little deeper and understand it from the perspective of the life of Shri Ram. Actionless action relates to the actions that we undertake in life that is based upon our experiences. What exactly is an experience? So take a look at the world around us. Let's call that the objective world. So we interact with people, we interact with things, we interact with animals. So we will call that the object or the objective world. That will be the object of our experience. The question is now, who is having this experience? So you walk into a garden and you see a rose. Who is seeing the rose? The rose is the object of that experience. The experience is seeing the rose. Who is having that experience? In other words, who is the experiencer? So one might say, well, me, the person, I am the one who's looking at the rose. Okay. So is it your eyes that is having the experience? Or is it your mind that is having the experience? So one might argue, well, isn't it both the eyes and the mind? Well, the eyes might see, but not really recall what it saw. You might see 1,000 things for the day, but remember just 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, but not everything, despite how much the eyes see. So then, is it then the mind? Is it the mind that is having this experience? Is the mind the experiencer? Well, let's ask, whose mind is having this experience? And of course, you would say, my mind. So then, who is my? Who is the owner of the mind that is having this experience? And if the mind goes into slow motion, in other words, where thought is put at rest, is it then possible that there is something greater than thought? Because the mind is simply the abode of thought. So is there something greater than thought that is having this experience? Greater than the mind. My mind. Who is my? My hand. Could the hand have an experience of itself? Could the hand say, I have had a good experience? Could the foot say, I have had a good experience? We usually say my foot, my hand, my heart, my mind, my body. Who is the my that we are making reference to? And in Vedanta, that my is the absolute experiencer, the absolute reality. That is what we call the Supreme Self, the Divine Self, that divine consciousness or God consciousness, or whichever other terminology that one wishes to use. So let us say that yes, this is the experiencer, that absolute reality, that vastness of consciousness. So we have three aspects taking place now. We have the experiencer, which is divine consciousness. We have the experience, which uses the instruments of the mind and the body to have an experience with the object. Let's simplify, because this could be complicated. So we have three things: the experiencer, the experience, which uses the instruments of experience, and the object of experience. In life, we go about acting, and in that sense of action, everything changes. The objects of the experience are changing. The flowers would bloom and the flowers would wither. The sky will be sunny and then it will be night. One day it would rain and one day there would be sunshine. Everything that we see around changes. We call that action. We ourselves change. From birth until adulthood, until our golden years, we change. Even our minds change. In fact, for some of us, we might be changing our minds quite often. Whether it be in terms of our jobs, our love life, our health, we make those changes in our lives. So our minds change. So all these aspects of the objective world in what we experience changes. However, there is something that doesn't change, and that is the divine self, the experiencer. The experiencer remains in absolute reality, the absolute permanent state of being. It changes not, and it is not subjected to change. So let's go back to Shri Ram. Shri Ram is the ultimate example of the actionless action. And it is not contradictory, as we would see in this case. In Shri Ram's life, what we saw were many changes taking place. The change in his stepmother towards him, his banishment from the kingdom and exile into the forest, the death of his father, King Dashrath, then his brother Bharat visiting him in the forest. He decided to remain in the forest and continue his exile for 14 years. And then the eventual kidnapping of his beloved wife Sita by Rama. Many changes took place in the life of Shri Ram as we have reached in the story thus far. But despite all these changes, we saw a person of total equipoise. A person in that state of complete balance. And we ask ourselves, how is that possible? Is Sri Ram not this epitome of the ideal self, the God self, the divine consciousness. And yes, but isn't he engaged in action? And the answer is also yes. And there is no contradiction, because in the state of actionless action, we remain in that state of equipoise as the silent observer in this world of action. It does not mean that we do not engage in action, but it means that we understand that our actions are based upon the instrument of action, the body and the mind, interacting with the objects of this world. But the Supreme Self remains untouched, unblemished, unperturbed, as it looks on at everything that happens in this drama called life. Now, if that is a little difficult to understand, let us take a trip to the cinema, to the theater. And most of us, I'm guessing, would love a good movie every now and again. When you walk into the cinema, you see a screen, a white screen, huge, big white screen. And then the movie starts. Let us assume it is an action movie. So you might see water or fire or a car that may crash, or a person might shoot a cannon or a gun, or you might see a fight scene, and all these things might be happening on the screen. And while the movie is going on, you in the audience might be feeling what the actors feel. You might be emotional, you might cry, you might laugh, or whatever the case might be. And then, after all this fire and all this water, the movie ends. And the screen goes back white. Now, despite what was projected onto the screen remained untouched, unblemished. Despite all the fiery scenes and the burning buildings, the screen remained untouched. Despite the floods that might have taken place, or the earthquakes as in the movie San Andreas, the screen remained untouched. What we have seen in the theater, in the cinema, was simply projections of actions on the permanent state of the screen. The screen was not affected by everything that was happening with it or on it. The concept of the actionless action is simply that. The screen, the white screen, represents that divine consciousness that is within all of us, that doesn't change, that will never change. It is not subjected to just one life. It is not subjected to any life, because it is existence itself. It is not subjected to the joys and the sorrows, the pain or the pleasure, the honor or dishonor in this life or in our daily experiences. Why? Because it is bliss itself. It doesn't depend on a beginning nor an end, because it is consciousness itself. It doesn't need to learn or unlearn, because it is the fullness of awareness. That is our real nature. Upon understanding this real nature, understanding that this is the state of Shri Ram, his real nature was existence, consciousness, bliss. And he remained in that state. Nothing in this world was able to take him out of that divine consciousness, that absolute consciousness. He was perpetually in that state of being. So what did we see in Shri Rama? We saw action that emanated from that divine consciousness. So while he engaged in this world, he was not affected by this world, but he operated in the world in the spirit, in the thought, in the passion, and in the motivation of righteousness. So he acted based upon what he was supposed to do, his dharma, his duty. But within himself, he remained that absolute reality, that unchanging reality, the permanent sense of divine consciousness. So that is what we mean by the concept of the actionless action. And we ourselves, there is so much that we can learn, because we go about life many a times believing that our situation, our interactions affect us in so many different ways. And it does. It does to an extent in terms of our instruments of action, our mind, our emotions, our bodies. They are affected. And it does not mean that we should not pay attention to what is going on around us. We must and we should, and do our duty as best as we can. But in the process of executing that duty, in the fullness of our own motivation and passions in life, do remember that we are much more than the body and the mind. We are much more than the objects of our experiences. We are the ultimate experiencer. We are that silent observer in this world. Upon understanding that we are that silent observer, we are better placed to deal with the issues that life may throw at us. We are in a better place to handle the challenges that may come our way, because we understand ourselves to be much more, to be greater than whatever happens in this world of objects. The ultimate yogi, the ideal individual, the ideal being, as Shri Ram was, is not just simply the experiencer having an experience with the objects of this world, but the ability for the experiencer to experience itself. What does that mean? It means that as we go about life, as we interact with the world, it is insufficient. It is insufficient for fulfillment. The world of objects and interactions will bring joy and sorrow, but only on a temporary basis. Our real bliss, our real peace comes from having that experience within ourselves, having that experience with our divine consciousness. The experiencer experiencing itself. As we go within ourselves, we understand ourselves, and we quiet our minds, and we allow ourselves to just be, remain in that state of being. It is at that point in time where we develop the actionless action. We develop being the silent observer. We are in the world, we interact in the world, but we transcend the world. We are able to lift ourselves above all the waves in this ocean and look upon it as the observer. not being affected by what is happening around us. My friends, these are critical questions that are sent as we go through our Ramayana studies. I welcome these questions because, as I said at the beginning, it sets the foundation for us to better understand what we are studying and the purpose behind it. So I sincerely thank the viewer who wrote me this letter, sent this question, and it is my pleasure to answer any questions you have as we proceed in our studies of the Ramayana. Thank you once again for joining me on this session of Journey of Enlightenment.